I want a better life. Now, I know all of us have either made that statement at some point or at least had that thought somewhere along the lines that there's something holding us back from living this life that God has called us to live. And one thing that holds us back is fear. Fear can control us and dominate us, whether that's an emotional fear or it's a physical fear, or maybe you have this checkered past where you have a few chapters in your life story that's broken. Maybe you've dealt with rejection or abuse or maybe addiction, and you might even make the statement that if you knew who I truly was, there's no way that you could love me. Now, no matter what kind of fear you're dealing with today, we want to help you. We want to help you overcome your fear and live a life that's full of love and peace and joy. If you'll stick around and check this out, we got some tips for you. Hope you enjoy.
I'm at Browns Mill Battleground just outside of Noonan, Georgia, where one of the last significant battles of the Civil War for the Confederacy happened, because the Confederate forces defeated the Union forces here in July of 1864. It wasn't a great victory because about 8 months later they ended up surrendering in Appomattox, Virginia. And you say, well, Arthur, who cares? I don't need a history lesson today. What are you even talking about? Well, we're on a battleground today because we're talking about fear. And fear is a battle that every single person faces every single day, especially the climate that we have been living in 2020. We're more aware of fear than maybe at any other time in our lives. We have more things to be unsure of, more things to be concerned about, more uncertainty than we've faced maybe in most of us our lifetime. And so we want to talk about fear for a few minutes. And the thing is, to understand fear is to overcome fear. To understand fear is to overcome fear. So let's get a little basic understanding about fear for just a minute. So there's a fear spectrum, right? And on the one end are people who are not afraid of anything. Maybe you got a guy in high school. Remember those guys had the no fear stickers on the back of their cars, and that guy would do anything. You could double dog dare him and he would try anything. He would do whatever. And maybe he was a little messed up in the head. Maybe he was a little crazy. Maybe he even had something physically that was wrong with him. Maybe he was just really brave. But there is a physical condition where the amygdala in their brain is not functioning the right way. And so they don't understand there's a problem sticking your hand in a flame. They don't understand playing in traffic is a bad idea. That jumping off a cliff into a body of water, it doesn't scare them at all, because nothing scares them, because physically they have a problem with their amygdala. Now, on the other hand, there are some people who are completely almost paralyzed by fear. They can't do anything. They're stuck at home. They don't go outside the house. They're afraid to go in the yard. And so I'm not talking about the people who are completely full of fear or the people that are completely fearless, but most of us, we operate somewhere in the middle of that fear spectrum. And so we want to talk about the battle of fear, because here's what goes on, is fear wants to dominate us, wants to destroy us, wants to bend us, even wants to break us. And so what we want to do is take a look at understanding fear, because when we understand it, we can overcome it. Fear is caused by something that we believe. Most of us, the number one fear, statistically speaking, is the fear of public speaking. Now, that great theologian, Jerry Seinfeld, he says that the number one fear is fear of public speaking. I think he's right. He says the number two fear is fear of death. So he says you put the two things together, and what you come up with is that when you go to a funeral, most people would prefer to be the person in the casket rather than the person doing the eulogy. Maybe you can, kind of associate with that just a little bit. I'm out here in the middle of some battlefield with mosquitoes buzzing around the size of aircraft carriers, and I'm not concerned at all about speaking publicly in a forum like this, but I'm afraid one of these mosquitoes may come down and chomp on me and take me to the next state. I have no idea what might happen. But here's what happens. Fear causes us to believe things that are true or untrue, and it affects us. It's something that we feel and experience. So if we're going to define it, it's an emotion caused by looming potential loss. We're like, oh, something's coming. And it may be true, it might not be, but it affects us in all kinds of ways. So look, if it bothers people, Arthur, why are we going to talk about it? Because it wants to control us. Like I said, it wants to break us. It wants to do something to us. And how many times have you had the opportunity to do something and fear kept you from doing something? Now, maybe it was a healthy fear. Like, that tattoo you're going to get in college and you chickened out the last minute and now you're really glad because that person you were dating at the time and you're going to get their name on your arm. You're really glad that you didn't get that person's name on your arm. Or maybe you were going to buy a car and it turned out, instead a friend bought the car and it turned out to be a real clunker. And so you're like, well, I'm really glad I didn't have to go through with that. But fear keeps us from doing things. It keeps us from experiencing opportunities. And so sometimes we've got to overcome that fear and to push through and see what our life could be like. Because it turns out, and you may not even believe that God exists, but it turns out that God wants you to have an incredible life, a life that is even better than you ever dreamed of. But it means that you've got to have a relationship with Him through His Son, Jesus. And for some people, that's a really fearful thing. But understanding fear is the key to overcoming fear. Now, a guy named Carl Albrecht, who's a psychologist, and he came up with this thing called the hierarchy of fear. So we'll call it the feararchy, right? Well, okay, I thought that would be funnier than it was, so sorry about that. But he says the first thing that everybody fears is extinction. Everybody fears dying. You know why? Because there's 100% chance that you're going to die. Everybody dies. And so that's a common fear that everybody has. The next most intense fear, he says, is rejection. You don't want people to say, I don't like you. I don't want you being around. I want to push you away from me. We don't like rejection. The third thing on his feararchy is loss of autonomy. In other words, we want to be in control. Maybe you've got a friend like this. Every time you go somewhere that your friend goes, well, I'll drive, and says, let's go to this restaurant. And that person always wants to pick the movie and says, well, let's always go to this place and let's do that thing. Or maybe you don't have a friend like that because you're that person. You should ask the people who live with you and say, hey, am I that guy? Am I that guy who always wants to be in control? Because they'll tell you. And then the next thing on the feararchy is separation. None of us wants to end up lonely. We don't be all by ourselves. And the top thing on the list that we are more afraid of than anything else is shame. We don't want anybody to find out what we have done. And we don't want them to know the secret, the shameful thing. So it turns out, looking at this feararchy, that our fear of not being able to live is greater than our fear of death. Did you catch that? I'm gonna say it one more time. It's really important. Our fear of not being able to live is greater than our fear of death.
Well, we hope you are enjoying the first segment of this episode on fear. We're actually going to get back to Arthur here in just a few moments. He's our lead pastor, and he's going to continue teaching on the topic of fear and how to overcome that. I'm loving it so far. And but before we go any further, I just want to welcome you. If you're new to Southcrest, or you may have recently found out about who we are, we're actually a church in 2 locations just south of Atlanta, Georgia. And we would love for you to connect with us a little bit more. All you have to do is go to southcrest.church. That's our website, and you can learn all about who we are, where we're located. You can learn about our life groups and our kids ministry and our adult ministry and men's ministry and women's ministry and all the stuff. Man, we have a lot to offer the entire family. And also you can keep up to date on everything that we're doing through all of our social media platforms. We would love for you to follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter. That would be awesome to be able to engage with you. And we would love to know where you're watching from. So when you log in, or if you follow us on those accounts, please drop us a note and let us know where you're from and how God is using this episode to impact your life. Now, before we get back to Arthur, we have this short story from an amazing woman here at our church. Her name's Tina. She's a life group leader here, and she deals with worry and anxiety and fear regularly, and she has an awesome story as to how she deals with fear and allows God to control everything and puts her trust in Him. So check this out.
My name is Tina Fromberg, and I have struggled with anxiety and worry for quite some time. One major thing is my husband's a fireman, so I worry with him going to work how he's going to have a light day, a heavy day, what it's going to bring, especially with the virus that's here right now. We know the outcome because we've been in the fire industry for 19 years. So we signed up for it and we're here to help, but it does not make it any less scary. So learning to give up that control piece and let Him guide us has helped. I think the Lord's taught me that there's a bigger picture at play, that I can't handle everything, I can't control everything. So to just take a deep breath and let Him take hold and let Him guide you. Over the course of having worry and anxiety in my life, I have learned to pray and to just ask specifically to calm my fears, calm the storm that's amongst me. I know it might be a cliche that you do depend on prayer, but it is. I do pray about it, and I do feel the calm when it comes, because I know that I can't worry about tomorrow. I have to worry about today. Get connected with people, because at the end of the day is what works, and you have people to lean on. When you have a life group and they know your anxieties, they know your fears, they know your worries, they pray for you. And one moment you'll just have a message come across that, hey, I just want to let you know I'm praying for you. Like something small. It's just nice to know that they're there for you, even when, when the storm's there, they're there for you.
So I don't know if you can see this or not, but this headstone right here says Joseph Wheeler, Confederate States of America, routed General McCook, United States of America. Now that didn't happen very often, so here's what I'll say about all that. I'll say that the boys from Noonan, we held our own, didn't we? I'm telling you, we took care of business. We sent them home. They were maybe crying like a bunch of pansies. We won, they lost. So at that day, hey, you talk about Noonan strong right there. That's what happened. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about fear. And how do we overcome fear? Because if God is for us, fear cannot rule us. If God is for us, and I believe He is, fear cannot rule us. In that same passage of scripture I was talking about just a moment ago, Paul says that we are more than conquerors. That means we not just win. You know what? It means we rout fear. We beat it into the ground. We can not just barely win, we are more than conquerors. I mean, we rout them. We tell fear, leave us alone. Fear, walk away from us. Fear, we're done with you. That's what he's talking about there. So we talk about our hierarchy of fear that we talked about a few minutes ago. Remember? The feararchy. So you know what that means? If you struggle with shame and fear of shame controls you sometimes, God says you matter. You matter. If you wrestle with, I'm afraid of being by myself and being lonely and nobody loves me and nobody really cares about me. God says, I will never leave you. If you wrestle with this whole deal, like, I don't know what to do because I'm not in control. Listen, if you will submit your life to the Lord, to God, you know what will happen? He says, you can trust me. And how about you got fear of rejection? You're afraid of what people will say about you or do to you or the opportunity that you might miss? God says this. He says, listen, everybody else may be against you, but I am for you. God says, I am for you. How about you're concerned about dying, right? Do you think this guy, General Wheeler, you think he was afraid of dying? I got no idea. We weren't here. I think everybody wrestles with that, but here's what God says. You don't have to be afraid of death. Because He says, I defeated death. I sent my son Jesus to die on a cross for you so you could have a relationship with me through my son Jesus, and you don't have to be afraid of death anymore. Because death is not an ending point for you. Death is just a transition point from this world to heaven, to eternity with Jesus. That's huge. That's huge. Because everybody dies. But if you're a Christ follower, it means you're taking your last breath here and your next breath in the presence of God. How good is that? So God's love does not barely win. It destroys fear. It absolutely destroys fear. So here's what we're talking about doing today, right? We're going to overcome fear. And the way to overcome fear is understanding fear. And most of the time, fear is a lie. It's holding on to the truth that God can do what he says he's going to do. Let's be the who and let God take care of the how. When there's something that's sitting in front of us, we're like, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can take that kind of step. That's huge. That's more than I can do. God says, no. You be the who, I'll take care of the how. Also, remember, it's not just understanding fear, it's understanding God's love. And his love for you is unmatched. His love for you is unconditional. He doesn't love you more if you act a certain way or less if you act a certain way. He loves you no matter what. And when you understand God's fear, there is no room for fear in your life when you understand God's love. When you understand God's love, there is no room for fear in your life. And the third thing, embrace God's love. You got to not just understand it, but say, I want it. And it's got to go from here to here. It's a 14-inch transition from your mind to your heart. And God reaches out to you and says, look, I want the very best for you. I want a relationship with you. Will you step into this relationship with me? So will you embrace God's love? You know, I was thinking about this and getting ready for the things that we were talking about today, about fear. And I read about the account of Jimmy Iovine. And maybe you've heard of him, maybe not. You know, he's been on American Idol a whole bunch, coaching singers. He's one of the most well-known producers in the world. And, you know, he tells the story that he was basically just an intern plus sort of, you know, doing a little bit of engineering and recording in Southern California. And his boss asked him, hey, can you come and work on a Sunday? And he's like, I don't want to work on a Sunday. I want to do something with my friends. But he said, well, I guess I will. And so he went on that Sunday and his boss said, look, I want you to produce this record we're going to put together today. And he said, well, who am I going to be producing? He said, just do the job. I have full confidence in you. And so Jimmy had no idea who was going to be coming in. And so about 20 minutes later, Jimmy Iovine, who's just an intern plus, you know, he's a new engineer. John Lennon comes walking into the recording studio and he produces one of John Lennon's records. And that's what set him on a path to be one of the most well-known record producers in the world. And he's made billions of dollars recording artists over the years. And someone asked him, say, hey, why were you able to do that? How did you have the confidence to record John Lennon the first time that you were responsible for a record? And he said, well, growing up, my dad always told me, whenever you walk into the room, you make everybody else in the room better. And so I sat there and I thought about, as John Lennon is in there in that room, that my dad always believed in me and said that I always made the room better if I was there. And you know what? Your Heavenly Father says the same thing about you. He looks at you, he sees the good in you, and he says, you know what? When you're in a room, you make everybody else better because you have a relationship with him and he is in you, and the Christ in you makes everybody else around you be influenced for the Lord. That's what he does. He looks at you and says, you make everybody better because of what he has done in you. And so you know what? Every single time we embrace God's love and we know that love wins and fear loses. Love wins and fear loses.
I love what Arthur had to say a minute ago, that we overcome fear by understanding fear. And then when we embrace God's love, there's no way that fear can dominate us anymore. We're actually going to get back to Arthur here in just a second. He's going to wrap up this episode. But before we do, if you would like to connect with us here at Southcrest, we would love that. It's very easy. All you have to do is grab your cell phone and text the word guest to 770-800-8622. There you're going to be able to fill in a little info if you'd like. You can even let us know if you have a prayer request or if you'd like to learn a little bit more about our church. Also, you can go to our website. If you'd like to give to the ministry here, just go to southcrest.church and click on the Give button, and you'll be able to support what God is doing here at Southcrest. Also, if you'd like to send us an email or learn about our ministries, you can do that on our website. Or also, maybe you'd like to come to one of our physical locations on the weekend. You can find directions there and where our campuses are located here in South Atlanta. We would love to see you this weekend. That would be amazing. Now, Without further ado, let's get back to Arthur and wrapping up this topic and this talk on fear.
Fear is a thing seeking control. Now, I use that word thing on purpose because I want us to remember that it's not a person, it's an emotion. It's not what somebody does to us, it's a thing. And so when we disassociate it with a person or a threat and realize it's just an emotion, then what we can do is we can become unattached to it and we can start to overcome fear. Because that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to battle through fear because it's going to continue to try and reach out to us. So I want to use a passage of scripture today from the Old Testament, the story of David and Goliath that almost everybody all around the world is familiar with. And whether you believe the Bible or not, I think we can learn some things that will help us overcome fear from this portion of the Bible. Now, I happen to believe the story. I think it's all true. And so what happens, there's a young boy named David. He's probably 13, maybe 14 years old. And a prophet comes to him and says, you're going to be the next king of Israel. And so David goes, okay, well, I guess so. But he doesn't really know what happens with that. He just kind of keeps taking care of the sheep and doing the things that his father's asking him to do. And a little bit of time passes, and the country where he lives goes to war with another country. Now, David lived in a country called Israel, and they go to war with a country called Philistia. And so the Philistines and the Israelites are going to go to war together. And very much like this, it would be a battleground where there's a big clearing in the middle. And so one army would be on one hill, and then the other army would be on the other hill, and they would do battle in the valley. Probably what happened here at Brown's Mill was on a smaller scale, was the same kind of thing that the Philistines and the Israelites had going on in the story of David and Goliath. Now, but here's the idea, is that each side picked a champion. And this was common in the ancient world. Rather than everybody fighting, each side would pick a champion. Whoever God was considered to be more powerful, they would say, well, that champion would win. Now, the Philistines, they were kind of playing with the loaded deck a little bit because they said, hey, we're going to send out Goliath. Now, Goliath was a giant. He was 9 feet tall. I'm 6'3", so he was 3 feet taller than me. He had 125 pounds of chain armor on the front of his chest. That's like walking around from middle school strapped to your chest. The point of his spear weighed 15 pounds. He was a man among men. He was huge. I mean, he didn't need an assistant. He needed a walk-up song. You know what I'm saying? He could get things done on the battlefield. And so he would come out every morning and say, hey, who wants to fight me? And everybody who was an Israelite would go, well, not me. I don't want to do that because that's probably not a good idea because you'll end up beating me. So they're all scared to death, full of fear. David shows up to check on his brothers because his brothers were in the Israelite army. He says, what's going on? They said, well, there's this giant out there and he's making fun of us every day and somebody ought to go fight him. And David says, well, I'll go. And here's why David said that he would go. Because although there was fear in his life, he was much more confident that God's love for David would override his fear. Because understanding fear is important, but you also got to understand love and understand what love is and how it impacts us and how it changes us. So long story short, you know what happens? David tries on Saul's armor. Saul is the king. The armor's way too big for him. He says, I can't wear this. And so what happens is David goes to the edge of a brook. He picks up 5 stones. He's got his sling. And this is the part I love because, he's got to be, on the one hand, shaking with fear, but on the other hand going, well, God told me to do this. I'm going to do this. And we can do the same thing. We can be full of fear, but know that God is with us, and the love that God has for us will overcome the fear that we're wrestling with. It's kind of like this. We worry about all the details and how we're going to accomplish something and how something's going to work out for us in our lives. And here's what God says. He says, look, if you will be the who, I'll take care of the how. See, we worry about the how. And see, for God, how is not a problem. Who is a problem? So God may be opening an opportunity for you, may be calling you to do something, and you're fearful. You say, well, how can I do that? I don't have enough knowledge. I don't have enough experience. I don't know the right things. I'm not a very good person who can carry out what you're talking about. But here's what really happens. Here's the way it all works out. It's very simply like this, is that what happens is that God is saying, I will take care of the how, you be the who. And I love what David says when he picks up this stone and he runs down to see Goliath. He says this, then David said to the Philistine, You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. So David says, I'm not afraid because God is with me. I love his 15-year-old kid now talking smack to this giant. And then he says, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Again, this kid saying, God is with me. I was afraid, but now I am confident because God's love is in me. And he says, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. I love that passage of scripture. It's one of my favorite in the whole Bible. Because what happens after that is that David takes a stone and he puts it in his sling and he lets it go and it kills a giant. Ask a doctor friend of mine. I said, how does that happen? He said, you'd have to take that stone and you'd have to hit somebody right here because Goliath was wearing a helmet. Now, do you think that David had that kind of mad skill that he could let go of a sling and the rock flies and hit somebody right there in a spot that small? I don't think so. I think he let go of that stone and God guided that stone, because what he does is when he sees us trusting him, he says, I'll take care of the how, you be the who. Because David's like, how in the world am I going to kill David? And God says, I got it. You be the who. I'll take care of the how. So understanding fear and understanding love is really important. You know, it turns out that love is the opposite of fear. That's why we've got to understand fear. In 1 John 4:18, it tells us that perfect love casts out all fear. When you are walking in the love of God, fear gets pushed out. And the more you allow God's love to fill you, the more you embrace God's love in your life, you know what happens? The less room there is for fear in your life. And you walk with confidence and joy moving forward. You know, Paul writes in Romans chapter 8, he says this, he says, for I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate me from the love of God. He said, there's nothing that can separate you from the love of God. It's just, do you want the love of God or the fear of man in you? Because being overwhelmed by God's love is more powerful than fear every single time. Being overwhelmed by God's love is more powerful than fear, because love wins and fear loses.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this short talk on the topic of fear today. I love that you don't have to be afraid anymore when God is with you. That's life-changing. It's powerful. And if this video has actually impacted your life in a positive way, will you let us know? You can just send us a short email at hello@southcrest.church. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know how you are choosing to overcome fear today. That'd be amazing. Now the band's gonna play us a song here in just a second, and the title's called Tremble, and the whole idea is how Jesus makes the darkness tremble and how Jesus, he silences our fear. And the good news is that he's with us each and every day, so you have nothing to be afraid of. Now, I wanted to take a second before we listen to the band and invite you back next week. We're actually going to tackle another topic that's very real that most of us have faced, and it's the idea of rejection. What happens when we face rejection, and how we shouldn't allow it to change or alter or affect our life moving forward, and how so many times when we're rejected, we allow it to crush us. And so we hope that you tune in next week. We really think it's going to impact your life. And as always, we're so glad that you tuned in today, and we hope you have a great week. We'll see you next week.
Bring it all to peace. The storm surrounding me, let it break. At your name still, call the sea to still, the rage in me to still every wave. at your name. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, and breathe. Call these bones to live. Call these lungs to sing once again. I will praise Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. And Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, oh Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Oh Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. And Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Oh Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, and Jesus, Jesus, oh Jesus, Jesus, 'cause your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome, and your name is a light forever lifted high. Your name